Have you ever considered that your profound sensitivity is not a flaw to be cured, but the very battleground where your true self is being forged through fire? For the first half of your existence, you have likely carried your empathy as a heavy, bleeding wound, constantly absorbing the unacknowledged darkness of the world around you while wondering why you feel so utterly hollowed out. You have allowed your ego to trick you into believing that your purpose is to be a sacrificial lamb for the neuroses of others, pathologizing your deep perception because it makes you feel isolated, broken, and perpetually exhausted. But this agonizing sensitivity is not a structural defect of your psyche, it is the raw, unrefined material of your calling, waiting for the moment you grow tired of being a victim to your own depth. The late-stage awakening of an empath is terrifying to the collective precisely because you stop absorbing the shadow and start reflecting it back with absolute, unyielding clarity. The early years of an empathetic soul are defined by a severe, unconscious imbalance, a state where the boundaries of the self are so porous that you cannot distinguish where your own psyche ends and the chaotic matrix of the collective unconscious begins. You have lived in a state of perpetual psychological invasion, mistake-taking the emotional projections of your parents, partners, and friends for your own internal reality, which has left your ego fragmented and weak. This is the painful phase of the wounded healer, a tragic archetype where you desperately attempt to fix the external world to avoid confronting the terrifying emptiness within your own boundaries. You became an expert at reading the subtle shifts in your environment not out of love, but out of a survival instinct to appease the devouring shadows around you. But the tension in your unconscious has been building for decades, and the suffering you are experiencing right now is the necessary psychological crisis required to break your false identity apart, forcing you to step into a terrifying, unstoppable authority that will shake the very foundations of your social circle. 1. The curse of the porous ego. To understand your suffering, we must first analyze the fragile architecture of your early ego structure, which was never built to protect you, but to placate others. As an empathetic individual, your conscious mind functions without the typical psychological armor that shields the average person from the chaotic undercurrents of the collective unconscious. You do not merely observe the anger, grief, or deceit of those around you, you swallow it whole, allowing their repressed material to colonize your internal landscape until you are completely estranged from your own desires. This lack of psychic boundaries is not a spiritual virtue, though your ego loves to dress it up as compassion to comfort itself. It is a profound developmental vulnerability that turns your mind into a landfill for other people's psychological waste. You have spent decades operating under the delusion that if you can feel everyone's pain, you are somehow responsible for managing it. This is a subtle form of hubris, a defense mechanism born from the sheer terror of emotional drowning. By focusing entirely on stabilizing the emotional storms of the people around you, you effectively avoid the demanding task of looking into your own abyss. Your ego has built a fragile identity around being the understanding one, the fixer, the eternal listener, because the alternative, standing in your own isolated truth, feels like an existential death. The psychological price of this porous existence is a chronic, low-grade dissociation. You are so busy vibrating at the frequency of other people's neuroses that your own individuation, the process of becoming the unique psychological being you are meant to be, has been completely arrested. You look in the mirror and cannot answer who you are, stripped of your usefulness to others, because your identity has become entirely parasitic upon their dependency. Every time you compulsively comfort someone at the expense of your own peace, you commit a quiet act of psychological self-mutilation. This exhausting dynamic inevitably leads to a profound energetic bankruptcy, a state of absolute depletion where the psyche can no longer sustain the weight of its own unlived life. You begin to feel an undercurrent of bitter resentment, a toxic emotion that your conscious mind desperately tries to suppress because it contradicts your idealized image of yourself as a selfless caregiver. But resentment is the voice of your neglected self, screaming from the depths of the unconscious that it is being starved to death. It is the first sign that the porous ego can no longer hold back the floodwaters, and that a structural collapse is not only imminent, but absolutely necessary for your survival. 2. The mechanics of the vampire and the host. We must speak candidly about the parasitic ecosystems you have participated in, for an empath does not exist in a vacuum, you require a specific psychological counterpart to complete your suffering. Throughout your life, you have been magnetically drawn to individuals who possess a highly rigid, fragile, and demanding ego structure, those who project an illusion of absolute power while harboring a black hole of unacknowledged shame within. These individuals instinctively recognize the porous nature of your psychological boundaries and view your sensitivity not as a gift to be respected, but as a resource to be systematically harvested. You became the perfect host for their shadow projections, willingly absorbing the toxic waste of their unexamined lives so they could remain comfortably blind to their own moral failures. This relationship is never accidental, it is a highly coordinated dance between your unconscious needs and theirs. Your counterpart requires an external container to hold the parts of themselves they cannot accept, their weakness, their cruelty, their dependency, and you, driven by a neurotic need for validation, have volunteered your psyche for the job. You allowed them to project their internal chaos onto you, accepting their blame, their gaslighting, and their emotional volatility as if it were your own inherent defect. In doing so, you enabled their psychological stagnation while ensuring your own slow destruction. Consider the domestic arrangements, the professional dynamics, and the friendships you have maintained. They are almost entirely predicated on your submission to this psychic drain. The moment you display a flash of authentic selfhood, a boundary, or an independent desire, the system reacts with violent alarm. Your counterpart employs guilt, anger, or passive-aggressive withdrawal to force you back into your designated role as the emotional sponge. They do not love you for who you are, they love you for your utility, for your willingness to function as the garbage disposal for their repressed anxieties. The most painful realization of this dynamic is acknowledging your own complicity in this exploitation. You were not merely an innocent victim, your unconscious chose this arrangement because it provided a twisted sense of safety and moral superiority. By playing the martyr, you avoided the terrifying responsibility of choosing your own path and risking real, authentic conflict. You chose the familiar, slow death of being devoured over the sharp, unpredictable pain of standing completely alone in your truth. But this parasitic contract has an expiration date, and the agony you feel today is your soul tearing up the agreement. 3. The Great Metamorphosis, the collapse of the false self. There comes a moment in the second half of life where the psychic economy of the empath undergoes a violent, irreversible shift. The energy required to maintain the false self, the persona of the endless giver, becomes vastly greater than the energy available to the conscious mind. This is the initiation into the dark night of the soul, a period of intense psychological disintegration where the illusions you have used to protect yourself are systematically stripped away by the objective forces of the unconscious. It feels like a clinical depression, a total loss of meaning, a terrifying void where your old identity simply refuses to function anymore, leaving you completely exposed to the raw gravity of reality. During this collapse, you will find that you can no longer summon the energy to care about the trivial dramas or emotional manipulations that used to dominate your daily life. The shallow interactions that once sustained your social identity now feel utterly repulsive, triggering an intense, visceral disgust within your body. This is not a failure of your capacity to love, it is your psyche executing an emergency shutdown to prevent total energetic extinction. The unconscious is forcing a radical withdrawal of your psychic energy from the outer world, pulling it back into the interior depths where it must be repurposed for the monumental task of self-reconstruction. This phase is characterized by a profound, agonizing isolation, as the people who once relied on your compliance begin to drift away or turn against you with open hostility. When you stop playing the role of the predictable, absorbing host, you break the unconscious contract that held your relationships together. They will accuse you of becoming cold, selfish, or mentally unstable, because they can no longer use you to escape their own psychological discomfort. You must endure this misinterpretation without defending yourself, allowing the false structures of your life to burn to the ground without attempting to salvage the ashes. The collapse of the false self is a terrifying death, but it is the prerequisite for the birth of the individual. In the vacuum left by your shattered persona, you are forced to look directly at the raw, unpolished reality of your own soul, stripped of all social utility and spiritual vanity. You begin to realize that the entity you called myself was merely a collection of coping mechanisms designed to keep you safe in a world that terrified you. Only when you surrender this manufactured identity can the true, indestructible core of your being, the self, begin to emerge from the darkness. 4. Integrating the shadow, weaponizing the sensitivity. To become truly unstoppable in the second half of life, the awakening empath must undergo the most uncomfortable psychological operation of all, the conscious integration of their own shadow. For decades, you have projected all aggression, selfishness, and malice onto the external world, viewing yourself as a pure, harmless being who only desires peace and harmony. This is a dangerous psychological lie. Your shadow contains all the lethal, predatory, and fiercely protective energies that you repressed in childhood in order to survive, the very forces you now desperately need to establish unshakable boundaries and command respect from the world. When you integrate the shadow, your relationship with your sensitivity undergoes a radical, terrifying mutation. You no longer merely perceive the hidden motives, the deceit, or the malicious intent of others as a passive, painful burden. Your conscious mind actively claims this perception as a highly calibrated instrument of psychological warfare. You begin to see through the social personas of those around you with absolute, chilling accuracy, recognizing the exact nature of their neuroses before they even speak a word. Because you have faced your own internal demons, you are no longer intimidated by theirs. You see their aggression not as a threat, but as a pathetic, desperate defense mechanism. This integration transforms your presence from one of soft vulnerability to one of quiet, formidable power. You no longer leak your emotional energy into the environment, you contain it, creating a dense, heavy psychological gravity that forces others to adjust themselves to your reality. When someone attempts to manipulate or gaslighting you, your integrated shadow does not react with panic or appeasement. It meets them with an icy, penetrating silence that reflects their own ugliness back into their face with absolute neutrality. You become capable of a calculated, precise ruthlessness that is entirely detached from malice, used solely to defend the sanctity of your psychological territory. This is the moment the empath becomes truly dangerous to the collective status quo. A person who can feel everything, but who cannot be manipulated by guilt or fear, is entirely ungovernable. You stop asking for permission to occupy space, and you stop apologizing for the discomfort your clarity causes in others. You recognize that your capacity for destruction is just as vital to your psychological wholeness as your capacity for love. By weaponizing your sensitivity through the shadow, you transform your former wound into a razor-sharp sword of discernment that cuts through the illusions of the world. 5. The threat of the undifferentiated mirror. We must examine why your late-stage evolution causes such profound terror in the hearts of ordinary men and women. The average human being lives in a state of chronic self-deception, using an elaborate system of social personas, material distractions, and superficial relationships to keep their own shadow safely repressed in the unconscious. They survive by mutual agreement. I will pretend to believe your lie if you pretend to believe mine. But when an integrated, awakened empath walks into a room, this fragile psychological treaty is instantly violated without a single word being spoken. Because your psychic boundaries are now highly conscious and deliberate, your presence functions as an objective, unvarnished mirror for the unconscious material of everyone in your vicinity. When people look at you, they do not see a blank canvas they can exploit, they see a terrifyingly clear reflection of their own hidden ugliness, their unhealed traumas, and their existential fraudulence. Your absolute authenticity acts as a silent, suffocating judgment on their superficiality, and that is something the average ego cannot tolerate. The reaction of the collective to an awakened empath is almost always a mixture of intense fascination and defensive hostility. People will feel an uncontrollable urge to confess their deepest secrets to you, drawn by the profound, non-judgmental depth of your understanding, yet, a moment later, they will turn on you with bitter resentment because your very existence makes them feel exposed and small. They will attempt to pathologize your clarity, labeling you as arrogant, detached, or cold, because it is far easier for them to believe that you are broken than to admit that they are living an illusion. Your presence threatens the social machinery of denial that keeps families, corporations, and communities comfortably asleep. You become a living reminder of the price they have paid for their conformity, the sacrifice of their own souls for social safety. The fear you inspire in people is not a fear of anything you will actively do to them, it is the primal terror of the ego confronting the objective truth of its own insignificance. You have become a walking manifestation of the unconscious, and man has always feared the dark waters from which he emerged. 6. The transcendence of projection, becoming the shield. As you solidify your psychological authority, you must master the art of dealing with the violent projections that your new boundaries will inevitably trigger. When you refuse to absorb the emotional garbage of others, that energy does not simply vanish, it bounces off your conscious boundary and returns to its source with redoubled force. The people who once used you as a container will now launch intense campaigns of guilt, slander, and emotional manipulation to break your resolve and force you back into submission. They are fighting for their own psychological comfort, and they will use every vulnerability you possess against you. To survive this onslaught, you must achieve a state of total detachment from the projections of the collective, a psychological positioning where you realize that their anger has absolutely nothing to do with you. When someone attacks your character or accuses you of selfishness, you must observe their behavior with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a biological specimen. You must understand that their rage is merely the screaming of a dying illusion, the frantic reaction of their ego realizing that its favorite source of narcissistic supply has been permanently shut off. You become the psychological shield, an entity that can stand in the middle of an emotional hurricane without a single drop of rain penetrating your inner sanctuary. You allow their projections to wash past you, refusing to offer any hooks within your own psyche for their malice to latch onto. If you still harbor a secret desire to be liked, to be thought of as good, or to be validated by the external world, you will fail this test. Their projections will find that unhealed wound and tear it open. True power arrives only when you are completely dead to the opinion of the collective, caring only for the objective truth of your own individuation. This absolute refusal to participate in the projection dynamic creates a profound psychological vacuum around you. The people who cannot adapt to your boundaries will simply evaporate from your life, driven away by the sheer discomfort of your unyielding clarity. Those who remain will be forced to elevate their own level of consciousness to meet you, initiating a radical purification of your entire relational ecosystem. You are no longer a victim of your environment, you are the active, conscious filter that dictates who is worthy of entering your psychological space. 7. Individuation, the unconquerable alignment. The destination of this painful, decades-long journey is what I call individuation, the total, unshakable alignment between the conscious ego and the objective authority of the self. For the awakened empath, this state represents the complete reversal of your early life dynamics. You are no longer a fragmented leaf blown about by the emotional winds of the collective unconscious, you have become an anchor, a solid, immovable rock of consciousness that stands firm against the tides of social delusion and tribal hysteria. Your sensitivity is no longer an open wound, it is the wide, deep ocean through which your creative power flows. In this state of individuation, you possess a quiet, terrifying self-sufficiency that the world finds utterly incomprehensible. You no longer require the validation of others to confirm your worth, nor do you seek their permission to speak your truth, because your authority is derived from an internal source that is entirely independent of social systems. You have confronted your shadow, integrated your animus or anima, and entered into a conscious dialogue with the divine spark within your own psyche. You are complete within your own boundaries, and a person who needs nothing from the world cannot be bought, blackmailed, or broken. This internal alignment grants you a profound, effortless efficacy in the external world. You no longer waste your vital psychic energy on exhausting internal conflicts or futile attempts to save people who do not want to be saved. You see the world exactly as it is, stripped of all romantic illusions and neurotic projections, and you direct your creative will with absolute, laser-like precision. Your career, your art, and your relationships become expressions of your authentic soul, carrying a weight of conviction that moves mountains and commands instinctive authority. The unstoppable nature of the late-stage empath lies in this total unity of being. Because you have suffered deeply and looked into the absolute darkest corners of your own nature, you possess a psychological resilience that ordinary people cannot conceive of. You are no longer afraid of pain, rejection, or isolation, because you know that these are merely the fires that temper the iron of the soul. You have converted your vulnerability into an unbreachable fortress, and you stand as a living testament to the truth that the most broken instruments can become the grandest conductors of destiny. 8. The alchemical master of reality. In the final stage of your awakening, you cease to be a mere participant in reality and become an alchemical master of it. The dense, heavy suffering of your past, the decades of emotional abuse, the agonizing loneliness, the chronic self-doubt, reveals itself to have been the essential prima materia, the raw lead that was necessary to create the pure gold of your current consciousness. You realize with a chilling clarity that not a single tear was wasted, every moment of heartbreak was a calculated stroke of the cosmic chisel, stripping away the marble of your false persona to reveal the majestic statue hidden within. As an alchemist of the psyche, you possess the rare and terrifying ability to enter environments of intense chaos, conflict, or despair and actively transmute that energy without being contaminated by it. Where others see an overwhelming crisis that triggers panic and regression, your integrated mind sees a profound psychological opportunity, a breakdown of obsolete structures that is preparing the ground for a higher level of order. You walk into the dark spaces of human experience not as a fragile victim seeking validation, but as a luminous authority who carries the light of consciousness into the underworld. People will look at you in this final phase and feel an instinctive, undeniable awe, for you possess a quality that cannot be faked, bought, or manufactured, an absolute, unshakable psychological weight. You have become a container for the collective unconscious, a person who can hold the tension of opposites, good and evil, light and dark, strength and vulnerability, and resolve them into a higher, transcendent synthesis within your own being. You are the living proof that sensitivity is the ultimate evolutionary advancement of the human mind, the sensory organ through which the universe experiences its own awakening. The fear you continue to inspire in the world is now tinged with a deep, reverent respect. The collective recognizes that you have broken free from the matrix of tribal conditioning and achieved a level of sovereign individuality that they can only dream of. You have stepped out of the prison of empathy and into the throne of your own psychological kingdom. Let them fear you, let them misunderstand you, let them whisper about your coldness in their shallow circles, it matters not. You have survived the fire, you have claimed your crown, and you are now completely, magnificently unstoppable. The journey from a broken, exploited empath to an sovereign, integrated individual is the hardest, most dangerous psychological path a human being can walk, but it is the only path that leads to true, indestructible freedom. If you have recognized your own painful history in these words, then the illusions of your past have already begun to lose their power over you, and the terrifying process of your true birth has begun. Do not shrink back from the fire of this transformation, and do not weep for the shallow relationships or the false identities that are currently burning away in the heat of your awakening. They are the price of your soul, and you must pay it gladly if you ever wish to stand in the full, unyielding majesty of your own authentic power. If this psychological confrontation has pierced through the armor of your illusions, you have already begun to perceive the reality that the majority of mankind spends their entire lives actively avoiding. Do not let this moment of raw clarity slip back into the comfortable sleep of compliance. Claim your depth, accept your shadow, and have the immense courage to comment below if you have finally recognized this agonizing, magnificent truth within yourself.